Welcome to Conscious Dominance, a DSRX studio production. These weekly conversations explore how to approach mindful leadership and inner dominance within the powerful container of committed, intentional relationships. Join Eric as he invites new dialogues, sharing practical insights for how the craft of consciousness opens the aperture to love, serve, and connect with unwavering presence.
Welcome to Conscious Dominance. It's good to have you here. I want to talk about collapse. This episode is inspired by DMs, some listener questions, and some recent conversations. Please keep these coming, especially to Instagram or to email. Recently, I watched the Masters. I'm not a big golf guy, but I was struck by the story of Rory McIlroy. I was struck by the fact that he had 17 attempts to win the Masters. Masters is one of the great golf tournaments, and he had won all the other great golf tournaments, and the only one that he hadn't won was the Masters. And he's a longtime golfer, started when he was young and has had sustained success through this entire time. But the one place that he couldn't win was the Masters. And I was struck at the back and forth in his play. On one particular hole, it looked like he just completely shanked it to the one side. It was a terrible shot. And then I think it was the very next hole, he shot one of the best shots that I've seen on an approach. And I was impressed because he seemed to collapse in that moment and then come back. And as I kept watching, I was like, that's interesting. And then at the very end, he had the chance to win it and hit a putt to win it all. And he missed it. And in many ways, it was a choke. As they say, when you collapse in sports, they say you choked. And it got me thinking about this notion of choking and what is that as a metaphor? And more importantly, what is it to come back from choking? And so I started thinking about this, and then turns out he does a playoff, which is one hole to see who can win the entire Masters. And he nailed it. He did awesome in that, and he won. And so he was able to choke and then quickly come back. And to me, it brought attention to this notion of what it is to be resilient and what it is to come back. And then I read an article from Brad Stolberg where he spoke about this notion of resilience and what that means in sports and mental fortitude. And it got me thinking about this in relationships. And it got me thinking about this specifically in a DS relationship, and specifically around sexuality and intimate relationships. And so I wanted to speak about this, the capacity to come back after you choke. It was an interesting thing seeing that moment, because when he won, he just started crying and crying. And they asked him later, they said, did you cry from just because you were so happy? And he's like, no, I was relieved. And there was something in that answer to me that helped me to think about myself in those moments when I come back from a choke. It's not that I'm super excited that I was able to come back. It's more of like a sense of relief. And so I wanted to kind of break it down. What is a choke? And so when I say the word choke, what I'm meaning is collapse. What I'm meaning is ruining the moment, closing off my heart. It's energetic often. Sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes you'll see it and the person, it's obvious that they're choking or collapsing and ruining the moment, being reactive. But often it's energetic, where you just feel somebody just kind of collapse. And it has physiological results when you collapse like that. For example, you're not able to stay erect in a sexual kind of moment. And also a woman will often feel you when you collapse energetically. They feel like you're gone, like you're not there in that moment. You're not holding her. They don't feel your presence. And the interesting thing, like in golf, where you get a lot of repeated opportunities to do better, you can choke and then come back and then do better. It's the same thing about a relationship. We have so many opportunities to choke and then come back. And just like what Brad was talking about in this article and what Roy has talked about, it's not so much that you choke that's a problem. It's that you stay in the state of choke or collapse that's a problem. You give up and you're not able to come back. And I think about this wonderful metaphor for HRV. It's the heart rate variability, and it means how well can you move from sympathetic to parasympathetic nervous system, or from the fight or flight nervous system to a more relaxed, healing kind of nervous system. And the higher it is, the better capacity you have to move from those two nervous systems. This is actually related to what I want to speak about. When you choke, in many ways, your body is being flooded, or you're not able to be present in that moment. You're in either a fight mode, too much fight, or too much freeze. You're either going too much or you're not going enough. And there's a physiological moment there where you can't be in your state. And it's your capacity, just like HRV, how quickly can you come back from that? And this is massively important in a relational dynamic. And you must feel it in your body and train it in your body to be able to do this, and not be afraid to get into a choke state. Like, don't be afraid to be in the yips, as they say, or to collapse. Start training yourself to be able to move from that state to another state. So, for example, sports teams will have noise that will come into their stadium. Coach will be yelling at them, extra mean to them, just kind of breaking them down. What they're doing is not just being assholes. What they're doing is trying to put you in this flustered state so that when you're in the real game, you have the mental fortitude to be able to hold yourself in that state and then come back. It's the same thing that happens in the military. Any type of training where they want to put you in this sort of altered state, they don't mind that you go into this altered state. It's, can you navigate out of it in the moment? And so this is a really interesting thing for relationships. And this is where I feel like being able to engage with a feminine being and invite her voice, invite her opinions, invite her to be able to have her ambitions, her sexuality, the fullness of her expression, because in that, it's going to, I've talked about this again and again, it's going to provoke something in you where you are going to be stimulated. And that stimulation, that response, is going to possibly put you in a reactive state. It's your capacity to move out of that state and not get stuck there that is the dynamic that really makes it work. I think the great example of this is sexually. It's given that your penis gets soft when you're in that state. When you're choking, you're literally choking the life force. You're choking your chi. You're choking your capacity to be in your present moment. Your penis will go soft. Your presence disappears. Your self-judgment floods your moment, floods the system. And your partner might say something that's really innocuous, and then all of a sudden you choke in that moment. And it's a great metaphor and a reality for that. And that moment becomes a feedback loop for you of a failing. And the key thing is to alchemize that choke. The mature masculine is not defined by that moment. And it's never a problem to collapse. A choke is not a negative thing by any means. The collapse is not a negative thing. In fact, we invite that in. In fact, we want that from our woman. We want that in ourselves. We just want to be able to navigate that. You know, when she feels you collapse, she feels you leaving and vacating. And that isn't a problem to her as long as you can come back from that. It can be a turn on to her if you can come back from that. If she feels you vacate in a moment, but then she sees you be able to readjust, and all of a sudden that moment that was a negative turns into a positive. It builds her trust in your capacity to put yourself in stressful situations. There's been moments that seems like a small thing, but we've been driving, and she has driving is a stressful situation for Rachel with me, because I have two different drivers. I can be a really awesome, relaxed, confident, safe driver. And then there are other times where I can be all over the place and I can get aggressive and erratic and kind of rev with the car, or I'll play off of a car. And it was a point for a lot of our relationship where at the beginning, she felt uncomfortable and unsafe driving with me. And everything has changed where now she can tell me when I'm not safe, and my capacity to hear her and listen to her tell me that I'm not being safe. She feels safer just having her voice be able to say that she feels unsafe and not get reactive to her saying this. This is where these kind of things become really important. It becomes a safety concern. Can she speak up, and will I collapse in that moment? Will I choke her voice, like literally tell her to be quiet and choke that, or will she be able to keep speaking about what her needs are or whatever it is? And I can be driving erratic, but then she says something and I handle it with grace, or I handle it with a moment. And I might not even change perfectly the way I drive, but I handle her voice well. Then all of a sudden there's an alchemy in that moment. And it's more, how do I handle the choke moment and not choke and come back from that? That becomes really beautiful if it's held with ownership and containment. Can I hold her voice? Can I hold her expression? One of the most powerful things and erotic things for a woman, actually, it's really interesting. For example, we just had this interesting thing recently where I went up on stage and I was in front of 300 people, and I was in a hot seat and I was being interviewed, and I was really nervous to begin with. And I was not a little awkward and a little bumbling. But then I was able to put myself in more and more presence. I was up there for quite a while. It was almost an hour. And by the end of it, I was holding and hosting this other person and in complete confidence. And so it was a great example of where I collapsed for a moment, but then I was able to bring masculine presence into that moment after that collapse. And Rachel was so turned on by me doing that. She was so aroused by first of all, my bravery for being the fool for going up there. I had to volunteer to do it. I was picked. I was awkward. I was kind of the fool at the beginning. And then I kind of came around into this real presence. She found that supremely arousing. And so what I'm trying to say here is, so many men are so afraid of choking. They're so afraid of collapsing that they never actually gain the capacity to come back from a collapse. They're fragile. And so a woman will use her voice, or some life situation will come up and they collapse, and they think they're being stoic, but their energy just vacates and there's no more presence. And that's not arousing whatsoever. Maybe he's not being reactive, but he's choking his life force. And this is where I like the word choke better than reactivity, because choke can be non-reactive. Like, you can choke your presence, and that can be very, very harmful to your woman. And yet, in that moment, if you choke yourself, but then come back from that, and you can alchemize that and you can own it, it can be very arousing. In many ways, the DS dynamic is a container for collapse and comeback. I mean, that's really what it comes back down to. Because essentially what I'm doing when I'm in a dominant position with my woman is I want to put her into a position of collapse. I want to put her into a position where she's in her choke. That kind of intensity is very arousing. But then bringing her back from that and turning that into a pleasurable moment and controlling that, that's both literal and metaphorical. I'm asking her to choke, actually. I want her to collapse. I want her to choke the moment. I want her to ruin the moment. I want her to use her voice. I want her to express her discomfort. I want her to bring up her pain. I want her to use a voice sometimes that's upsetting to me so that it builds my capacity to hold her. And when there are times when we're both doing this, there could be a mutual collapse and a mutual ruining, and how we're able to navigate that can be an erotic friction. What's interesting is she can ruin the night with her emotionality, and that actually is a submissive thing that she's doing if I'm able to hold that. she becomes aroused by that and turned on by that. If I can hold that and contain that and not let that make me choke, can I alchemize her pain? Can I change that moment of pain into a moment of connection? Can we see that connection in those moments actually equals a dominant gesture? So much of the time we think of dominance as control. And I want to move that definition away from that and see that for the feminine in a submissive space, it's your ability to make connection after you've alchemized her pain and hold her there energetically. That gesture becomes a dominant thing. And this dynamic allows eroticism to deepen. The erotic is on the other side of intimacy. The erotic is vulnerability, but it's a vulnerability. In many ways, choking is being vulnerable, but it's like, how can you come back out of that and be held in that vulnerability? There's always someone, though. The essence of a DS relationship is someone is collapsing and someone's holding that. And so if you're in the masculine pole of that, most of the time, you shouldn't be collapsing. If you do, it should be quick in and out. And you should be hosting her in her bigness. What's interesting with Rachel, so much of our life is me hosting the bigness of her expression, of her ambition and her company and her sexuality and her life force that's here channeling some gifts into the world. And how well do I hold all of that? So it's not always a negative thing. It's sometimes just a flooding of the system. It's just an overwhelm of like so much awesome stuff. And the everyday of my life is an opportunity for me to see this dynamic and to see it play out and to hold it. I've been working with this couple, coaching them, and the woman, she's an incredible submissive and is able, though, to see her role as someone that can also host him in his moments of collapse. And there's a great story here where she was able to be in her feminine and kind of help him through a moment of his own challenge. And he was able to rise to the occasion, and it ended up being sort of really beautiful. And the way it was able to help her trust that he was able to come back out of it. Let me explain. What happened was they were in two different rooms. She was in the shower and he was in the couch and he was on his phone. And she comes out of the shower and he immediately jumps up from being on the couch in a startled kind of way. And as she's talking to him, she can see that he's closing apps on his phone quickly. And in that moment, she made a decision. Should she say something that might provoke in him something that would ruin the moment, or should she keep her mouth shut? And she decided to say something. And so she said, "Hey, that makes me feel really uncomfortable that you were looking at something that maybe is untawdry." And in this relationship at the present moment, there was really nothing to suspect, but that man did have a past of infidelity and of porn use. And she had been dealing with that in the past, but they had worked through that a lot, but it was still kind of in the field. And she brought that to him, and they were about to be in an intimate space. It was literally, she was in the shower to come out, and he was jumping up so that they could be together. And everything up to that point was a great night and a great time. And so it felt rather disruptive. And at first, he didn't have a shirt on. And in that moment, as she was saying that, he had a momentary collapse. And what he often will do is he'll put his shirt back on just to feel more protective and less vulnerable. And she just in a soft voice said, please stay open. Stay with me. Please keep your heart open. Don't leave me. All things that I've helped her with and all things that I've told him. And it was beautiful the way they did this. They both stayed with an open heart in that moment. And he was able to just sit with her in that moment. And she could feel in him that he wasn't hiding anything. And he was able to hear her voice. And he was able to host her in a great night. And it was a moment where there was a collapse, where he stopped being able to hold her, where he choked and where she then further choked the moment. But they were able to come back from that. And they were able to come back in a way that they hadn't really proved to each other that they were able to on that subject. And so it was a beautiful moment. And that same couple has had other moments where mid-sex or mid-project, mid-life, mid-ritual, something gets ruptured, but they were able to come back from that. And that's something that is so paramount that I've seen with Rachel, is it's not so much that I collapse, but it's my capacity to return. It's all about the return. It's all about my capacity to come back from that. It's the HRV. I get to a point now where what's really cool about Rachel is when I collapse momentarily, she doesn't get concerned. It doesn't scare her because she's like, oh, he's got this. And now we get to a point where I'm actually thanking her for ruining the moment and thanking her for afterwards and trusting me that I'll come back from this. And, those of you who've been with me through this journey for this year, you've seen that my reactivity has been something that I worked on. And we'll have Rachel on a show if you want to ask her about my reactivity and how she's handled that. But I feel like I've improved immensely in that regard. And only by increasing the volume on her voice that I feel like we've been able to move through some things. Rachel and I, it's almost like a quarterback-receiver relationship. And I mentioned this before, but I'm a football fan, appreciate, especially through knowing Rachel and her family, big-time Kansas City Chief fans, lifelong. And there's a relationship between Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce that's really beautiful, where if Kelce drops the pass, he doesn't think all of a sudden I'm not going to throw it to him anymore. He's going to throw it right back to him. He knows that he's got him, and he brings it right back to him. And he does that with his other players too, where he never throws them under the bus. He continually will say, hey, I could do better. I could throw it back. And he gives them another chance, and will often on the very next play throw it to him. And it's that level of trust, not that they'll never drop it, but that they will keep coming at it and keep coming at each other. That's what really builds a team, and that's what builds a relationship. The bulldozer parent is often something that's out there in life where people talk about these parents that will come through and get rid of all failure, get rid of all resilience. This is where so many of the problematic situations occur in our lives as adults. Am I a bulldozer dom or a bulldozer sub or a bulldozer in a relationship where I'm trying to keep any challenging moments from my partner? So I'm not going to say the challenging thing. I'm going to protect him or her from reality so he doesn't or she doesn't get upset. And what that does is it prevents failure, which prevents resilience. And so when you prevent your partner from collapsing or choking, you prevent them from actually gaining their capacity to develop resilience. So don't be a bulldozer partner. Don't be a bulldozer dom. Speak the fucking truth. Speak it to her, speak it to him, and let's build a resilience. So there's no part of this DS that keeps us from reality. Yes, we love playing in fantasy, but it's a fantasy with a foundation of a relationship that's based upon the brutal facts of life, especially early in the relationship, because it's much harder to change this later on as it grows. Failure early creates muscle memory. You know what I mean? Like if we can do this right at the beginning, we got this. It's something where Rachel and I, we've been intensely together for several years. But the first, I would say, year or so, it was not based in a certain reality. And I would really want to give credit to Andrew and Infinite Devotion, where he spoke about how the submissive and her expression was key to the dynamic of a relationship. And it was a paradigm shift for both of us. And it led to, I would say, 1.5 to 2 years of real challenges and real difficulty, because there was a whole lifetime of Rachel choking her voice and me dropping the pass and dropping her. And when she started using her voice, I continued to drop. I didn't even know I was dropping her before. And then now I became aware that I was dropping her. And that actually made it much more challenging to know that I was actually failing. But it built my resilience. It built my strength. And now I will say that we're in a much, much stronger, much better, much more resilient space where I'm able to come back from the choke. I've used the metaphor of sport and the metaphor of parenting. I think it's interesting in engines, any old style engines, you've got a lawnmower or on a boat, there's a choke place. And the choke place is a valve that limits the airflow from flooding the engine and enriching the mixture. And it's used intentionally when there's a cold start. It allows more fuel to go in it with less air. It allows the engine to start. But what can happen if you have too much choke, the engine floods and it stalls. And too little, it sputters and it fails to ignite. That's such a good metaphor because it's like the freeze and the fight. Sometimes we think that, oh, great, they're not being reactive, but they're actually in a freeze mode. And I think there's a lot of men out there flooded and there's a freeze or it's sputtering and it's failing to ignite. And then the fight. But both of them equally are the result of a choke. They're both choked. And I think what often happens is that men get stuck. The masculine gets stuck in the choke and it gets stuck in the freeze. And women will get stuck in the freeze. And their whole life is in fight, fawn, freeze. And women are constantly without a man in their life that can hold them through that and help their nervous system to be calm. They're just constantly fawning or constantly readjusting life, but their nervous system isn't in a relaxed space. It's sputtering and it's failing to ignite, or they're flooding the system. Sometimes we do need the fight or flight. We need to get into these jacked nervous system states. We just can't get stuck there. And it's not necessarily always that our partner is completely flatlining and there's nothing going on. Sometimes maybe they're overwhelmed. It's a flooding situation that's happening. And that's actually keeping them in a neutralized state. And it's important to know when they're not executing or performing or in a relaxed state, it could often be too much or too little, just like the choke. Something's off. And it's usually that we need just the right amount of air, just the right amount of fuel. And that's where the situational awareness and the capacity to be competent, the artistry. That's why making love is an art. That's why dominating is an art. It's not a science. It's an art. Because sometimes we're overdoing it. Too loud, too hard, too much at the beginning. Do you need to slow down? Can you just do enough? Can there just be enough fear, just enough adrenaline, just enough pain, just the right amount? And the goal isn't to necessarily avoid the choke, but it's to know my system well enough and to know her system well enough to start it again. There's an intimate relationship that people have with their old cars. You can see these old guys with their engines. They kind of know just the right amount of choke, just the right amount of air. You can kind of feel it. And every old engine is different. It's the same with our women. It's the same with ourselves. Where do we know that choke point? This is necessary. Another place that a choke point comes out is in architecture and traffic. There's a deliberate narrowing. It's a funnel to slow the movement. And sometimes we need that. We need a point to slow things down. It's to create an awareness or to apply control. Great architecture isn't just a fucking box, but it has points that kind of bring you to it and then widen you out. Bring the light in and flow. And it's the same thing. Like in biology, we have a choke point. It's our throat. And it's literally the expression of our voice, and it's our survival. It's how we eat. It's our breathing and our swallowing. And it's also very erotic. And so when we're choking, please don't judge it. I love the Mayo Clinic's definition of suffering. Pain times resistance equals suffering. And it's similarly like when we choke, if we judge it, that's going to times our judgment equals our time getting out of the choke. So there has to be an impartiality to the choke. Can we see the choke as information? Oh, my body's getting flooded. Can I make the little adjustment so I could slow down, or I can pay attention, or to narrow my focus. Or sometimes when I choke, I'm like, oh, I just need to shut the fuck up and take a deep breath and not rush. And can I use the choke point erotically? Is she being overstimulated? Is she overwhelmed? Do I need to turn off the lights? Turn down the volume of the music? Is there too much? Is there too little? It's asking me to pause, to contain, to alchemize. And all that really means, it's another word for alchemy, is play, fantasy. All of that is literally the magic sauce to turn the choke into something erotic. And so in kink and DS, choking is consensual. It's symbolic, and it's an exchange of trust. Can we have that in our life? Can we see that the intensity and the surrender and the containment that's necessary when it's done well is a beautiful thing? And it's not something to be avoided. It's actually what makes an erotic play. And in our own life, can we start playing and dancing in that? To be able to choke someone intentionally and safely and erotically requires great awareness and presence and alertness. And just like in those heated moments, we can do that with ourselves when our nervous system gets flushed, and to not let our emotions choke the moment. And can we bring that tension and that relational tension? It's not reacting. Reacting is unconscious. Can we respond with consciousness? And our culture, we're so afraid of failure. We're so afraid of collapsing. But in order to be erotic, in order to be in an intimate DS relationship, we must embrace the failure and master the ability to move through that and to create the alchemy and create the play, and realize that our messing up is the fertilizer for the soil of our relationship. And it's our recovery and our repair that is the real power. It's not in not collapsing. It's not Royal McIlroy never choking that makes him a great golfer. It's his capacity to come back from the choke that makes him a great golfer. Travis Kelce, what makes him a great receiver is not that he never drops a pass. It's can he come back from that? When Patrick Mahomes, after this Super Bowl, watch out next year and his capacity to come back from that. And it's super sexy when you can come back from failure. It was literally what a story is, what a myth is. Nobody wants to read a story about someone just awesome, and then they got more awesome. That's not a story. They want to see someone awesome who fails and then comes back from that, the hero's journey. And that essentially is how you build trust. Trust comes in our capacity to move from collapsing and coming back from that. And it's the same in ourselves and the same in a relationship. And that's why in these intimate relationships, like a DS relationship, you build trust because you're doing something where you're choking this person and then you're bringing them back from that. But can we do that emotionally? Can we do that through our work? Can we do that in our moments of intimacy and our moments of connection and our moments of sexuality and just in our everyday life? We can build that resilience in all of our life. So thank you. Thank you for being here in this new season. And please DM us at DSRX Studio. DSRX Studio is a collaboration with myself and Rachel with Arosha. Please also subscribe, rate, share, and especially share this with someone navigating their own choke or their collapse. Also, if there's any questions further for Rachel in this season, we're going to be bringing her on for more Q&A. So thank you for listening.